When we last left off with our blue dragon, we painted the inside of the wings, and now it's time to paint the outside of the wings. Since I spent so much time on the scales, I want to do something special for the outside as well. Heck, I already spent 2 weeks on this thing, what's 1 week more? To start off with, I used a very dark undercoat. It's Vallejo Game Color Royal Purple mixed with black. That's going to be important to get the proper effect. And then I just started making dots, a whole bunch of dots. The color we're using right here is Vallejo Model Color Turquoise. And I originally thought about using purple, but then for some reason I decided turquoise instead. But as you can see here, I'm just using the brush and trying to make various sized dots. You definitely want to go larger than you would think would be appropriate, because we're going to be adding a lot of smaller ones as we go on. Our highlight color is Vallejo Model Color Light Turquoise, and just proceeding to add highlights on majority of the dots, especially the larger ones. We definitely want to get a good highlight on those. Actually, the larger ones, I did go back and do a few thinner coats, so there's a more subtle transition than what you're seeing here. And also we have to take into account the curve of the wing for placement of the highlights. But essentially, just like before, we're adding more dots. Most of the turquoise dots got highlighted, some did not. Sometimes I just put the light turquoise right over our very black undercoat. This is kind of just a mismatch of things that hopefully will all come together in the end. Now, I couldn't use just turquoise on the wings because we have a blue dragon here. If I used only turquoise, it wouldn't match the color of the dragon. So we have to add some blue dots into the wings as well. And for that, we're using Vallejo Model Color Medium Blue, same color that we used on the body. And then proceeding, once again, just to add a whole bunch more dots. And you can see we're starting to fill the pattern in here. And that's why you want to go with larger dots than what you might think. You know, instead of trying to make the smallest you possibly can, go with bigger ones, and eventually you'll be filling in those blank areas with smaller dots. To highlight the blue, we are using Vallejo Game Color Magic Blue. Once again, the same color that we used on the body, so everything blends in real nice. And once again, highlighting majority of the blue dots, not necessarily all of them. I am trying to keep the highlights away from where the wing membranes touch the fingers or digits of the wings, because that's going to have to get shaded eventually anyway. But again, there's a few areas where there's the black underneath, trying to fill those in, because that's the key really to put this together, is you got to make sure we don't have any really big spots of that black undercoat. We need to fill in everything, but make sure that the dots are not touching each other, so then we have a nice contrast between each one of our little circles. And I guess I'll actually mention it now if you're wondering about the more purple tone dots on the left side there. That was my first attempt. I tried for a more purple look and decided that the undercoat needed to be darker, and that I decided to go with the turquoise color instead of purple. Going back to our turquoise, the next highlight is light turquoise mixed with whites. This, for the majority, has to be placed on the larger dots because they're going to attract more light. So we want those to pop a little bit more, but also some of the smaller dots got this same treatment as well. And for the blue parts, white mixed with magic blue for the highlights there. And you can see now, as we add the highlights, we're starting to get a real round bubble appearance with all our little pebble scales. And once again, like with the scales on the body, we're adding texture here. We have a flat, very flat surface, but it appears to have texture to it and have roundness to each one of those little pebbles. Now for some shade. Ideally, the way to do this would have been to shade each one of the dots, use a darker color as we were painting them. Shade the ones on where they meet the digits of the wings, but that would have taken forever and it would have been extremely difficult. So instead, using a wash, and we have a wash of Vallejo Game Color Dark Blue here, putting on very, very thinly and carefully just around the areas where the wings touch the digits to increase the idea there's depth, there's a curve there. And we have to be careful with this because it has to be a really dark color, because as we're applying this, we're darkening all the spots that we just painted, but we're also lightening the underneath color, that very dark blue. So I have to be very cautious with this and not use, for example, if I use too light of a color of blue, it would have messed up the effect, and we actually would have lost the pebble pattern that we just painted on the wings, because the undercoat would have been brought up to a too light of a color. Back to the body for a moment. You may have noticed the ridges that I left bare on the legs of the dragon, and that's because I had an idea of painting him a different color because it kind of stood out on the model, and I didn't know what color at the time, and I figured it out that turquoise would have been a perfect color after doing the wings. So proceed to highlight them the same way that we did with the pebbles. We're using the turquoise, light turquoise, then light turquoise with white. The trick here is to blend it smoothly into the blue. So halfway up these ridges, I painted just like all the other blue scales, and then as I worked my way down with the turquoise, I decreased the amount of turquoise being painted on those areas. So more and more of the blue from underneath would show through, and so we have a nice smooth transition between the two colors. Underbelly time. I can't remember if I mentioned it in the first part, but I am trying to copy, for the most part, the official paint scheme for Dungeons & Dragons Blue Dragon, and that means yellow underbelly. Started off with an undercoat of Vallejo Model Color English Uniform, and now I am applying English Uniform mixed with Vallejo Model Color Golden Brown. And you can see we're doing the exact same thing we did on the other scales, up and down motion, using a slightly thicker paint, so we have a nice texture detail on all the scales. Our next highlight is Golden Brown mixed with Vallejo Model Color Yellow Ochre, and again proceeding just to add the highlights as we've done before, working our way towards the bottom edge of all those belly scales, and of course on the underbelly we're not going to highlight to the same amount, to the same light color that we use on the broad obvious front of it. Next highlight is straight Vallejo Model Color Yellow Ochre, and you can see we're getting a lot more texture on the underbelly here than I did on the regular blue scales. That's because we're using less layers of paint and less colors, rather than the 7 or so we used for the blue. I think we're only using 5 here. And then final highlight, we have some buff mixed into our yellow ochre just to add that final little edge detail. And then after this, I went into the recesses with some wash made of Vallejo Model Color Camo Black Brown, so we get a nice crisp edge on the top as well. Another area on the body I left bare before were these kind of spikes coming out from underneath the wings. My initial idea was to paint those a bone color, but being so close to the brown wings, it really didn't work. So I just painted them the same color that I used on the body, but I increased the highlights, and also I highlighted all the way up to Vallejo Model Color Sky Blue. And that makes them stand out just a little bit more. And also, once I had that established, I knew what color to paint the little scale things running down his chest. You don't always have to figure out every color before you paint the miniature. Sometimes things, will occur to you as you're painting. At the end of a project, there's always a lot of little tweaks that go on, areas that you realize need improving, slight color changes, The inside of the wings is a good example. After putting so much work into other parts of the model, decided to need a little punching up. So the blue color on the scales, I extended into the digits on the wings. Also, I added a few extra highlights on the tips using yellow ochre and white and buff, like we did on the undercoat, to match those. And also, to blend the brown in more with the blue, you can see right here I'm using some Vallejo game color Stormy Blue, our original first blue that we started with, and putting on a few light tints to help blend it in a little bit better to the wings. And with that, we are done with our dragon, and he came out pretty spiffy looking. Better for the number of hours I spent painting the damn thing. It's a really nice miniature. Like I said in the beginning, I really like just the big scales. You can have a lot of fun with those, and the pose is very animalistic. He's about to swipe at something. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this paint job and the figure. And the one thing I want to point out here for everyone thinks that this is something totally amazing. I didn't do anything that any one of you out there can't do yourselves. The wings, for example, perfect example. It looks intricate and detailed. It's just a bunch of dots. That's all it is bringing them all together, and spending the time to do it is, well, the slightly impressive part. But any one of you can just make dots. You could do it. It's just a matter if you have the time to spend a week painting a pattern like this. But it's very simple, so I encourage you to spend more time on your miniatures if you can. Use simple techniques like this and to increase the texture of your models, to add something that wasn't even there to begin with, and now we've really created something on this flat wing surface. Yeah, overall I had fun on this one, and I hope you had fun watching it. And before you ask, yes, we will be covering the base. I'm going to do that in a separate video to make these things easier for people to index. But there will be a pseudo part 3 for this series. Till then, hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Buck, plank chest.
Stump, Junkman.
Dirk, hard peck.
Rip, steak face.
Slate, slab rock.
Crud, bone meal.